Hello and welcome to Nithrania YouTube channel. You're watching another episode of the Game in a Nutshell series designed for explaining the board game rules. My name is Branislav Berec and today we're going to learn how to play the new game from Vladimír Suchý, Evacuation, published by Delicious Games. To set the game up, first each player chooses a color and takes one player board and all the components of the chosen color, 25 tokens, these are factory tiles, and these are side tiles. Choose any of those 4 continents in the old world, and for each space, place a matching side token on it. Then these 2 ocean spaces will get these 2 tokens that are left. Place 2 tokens of each player on the starting space of this progress track, and then give each player one set of these technology tiles. They are separated by the number on their back. So choose any suitable method to randomly deal one set of these tiles to each player. So for example here we have a set of technology tiles with number 3. And place these technology tiles in these spaces on your player board. The tiles with 1 dot will be placed in the first row indicated by 1 dot. The tiles with 3 dots will be placed in the third row. The placement in each row is random. Then place one of your tokens as the marker on the first space or the starting space of your action track. Place these 3 production markers on the 0 space on the production track. Place the starting stadium, that's the card with this bag and your color, face up on the old world side, that's the world with this picture. Then shuffle this stadium deck and draw 3 cards face up. Obviously exclude any starting stadium cards of the player colors which are not in play. Shuffle the spaceship tiles and draw 3 of them face up. And then separate these infrastructure cards into 2 decks, numbered 1 and 2. Shuffle each deck separately and then place deck number 1 on the deck with number 2. And then again draw 3 cards face up. Place this year counter on the number 1 space on this year track and take these 2 year-end bonus cards with the flag, randomly choose one of them and place it face up in this space on the game board. You can return the other back to the box and then take the remaining year-end bonus cards, choose 3 of them at random and place them face up on top of the previously chosen year-end bonus card. This way you have 1 bonus card for each round, each year of the game. Finally, in the standard game, give each player a stack of these action cards. Some 8 cards should be more than sufficient. You can always take more cards later in the game. They will only be used as the markers for these actions, so the other side is not used at all. And as the very last step, take 1 token from each player and randomly distribute these tokens on this player order track, and that's the end of the setup. When you decide to play the points mode, shuffle this deck of goal cards and deal 4 to each player, and you will draft these cards. So take a look at your cards, choose one of them to keep and pass the other 3 to the player on your left. You will get 3 cards from the player on your right. Again, look at them, choose one of them to keep, pass the other 2 to the player on your left, and continue like that until you have 4 goal cards in your hand. Look at them, choose 3 of them to keep and the 1 to discard, and those are your goal cards for the game. In Evacuation, players lead their nations on this old world which is becoming inhabitable, and therefore players need to move their nations to the new world just discovered, which has plenty of resources and oxygen. But not only you have to move those people there, but you also have to make them happy. The game is played in rounds, which represent years, and each year has the following 7 phases. The first phase is the income phase. Players generate resources on both worlds, but also the population on both worlds will consume food. The second phase is the action phase, in which players take turns in this player turn order. On your turn, you perform one of these actions from your player board. You will mark the chosen action with this marker. You will also have to move this marker, because the more actions you take, the more energy you have to spend. And after you finish your action, it's the next player's turn. Players continue like this until all players have passed. Then in the third phase, if you have any of these spaceships, you can fly them from the old world to the new world to evacuate your people and buildings. Then in the fourth phase, you will adjust the turn order track. Then in the fifth phase, you will move on this progress track. In the sixth phase, you will get bonuses from the year-end bonus card. And phase number 7 is the cleanup and the preparation for the next round. The game can be played in two different modes. The standard is the race mode, in which the first player to build 3 stadiums in the new world and to move the production of all the resources to at least 8 or more will trigger the end of the game and also potentially win the game. However, you get penalized for each site that you don't evacuate from the old world, and there are other bonuses and penalties. So the game can end earlier than in round 4, and from those players who have the 3 stadiums and reach the production levels, the player with the most points will be the winner. If you don't want to play a race mode, you can play a points mode, in which you play full 4 rounds of the game and then the player with the most points is the winner. The first phase of each round is the income phase. You will generate resources separately for the old world and the new world. First, look at the old world. There are 3 types of resources in the game: food, energy, and steel. And to calculate your production, count the number of symbols of each color altogether on the old continent. At the start of the game, you will generate 7 resources of each type. For example, here we have orange 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So take the resource cubes and place them on the old world. Small cubes represent 1 resource, the larger cube represents 3 resources. Then do the same for other resources, meaning steel and food, and then generate resources for the new world. At the start of the game, you will produce nothing. Later in the game, the production is tracked by these resource markers. So in this example, we would generate 2 food and 3 energy. Always keep these resources separated for each world. Then after generating resources, the population on both worlds will have to eat some food. In the first 2 rounds of the game, there is no food consumption in the new world. However, in the first round of the game, you have to spend 5 food on the old world. So you have to spend the resources from the old world in this case. Finally, there are some requirements for the entertainment in the new world. At the start of the first and the second round, you don't have to have any stadiums. However, at the start of the third round, you have to have at least 1 stadium. And at the start of the last round, you have to have at least 2 stadiums in the new world. So that means those stadiums must be on this side of your player board for the old world. For each missing stadium, you have to take 1 penalty chip. Each penalty chip is worth 1 negative point at the end of the game. The same applies for food. For each food you are not able to pay, you take 1 penalty chip. Then the second phase of each round is the action phase, in which players take turns in this player turn order. On your turn, you have to perform 1 action or pass. If you pass, you may no longer take turns in this action phase, and once all players pass, the action phase is over. Now, if you decide to take the action, first choose one of the actions on your player board. This space is 1 action. This is another one, then this is an action, this is an action, this is an action, and so on. So after you choose an action, let's say this one, take one of the action cards and place it under that action slot. There are 4 slots numbered 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then advance your action marker 1 space forward. If the space contains any energy symbols, you have to pay that energy immediately. So for example, if you move from space number 3 to number 4, there are 2 energies here, which means you have to pay 2 energy, which must be paid from the old world at the start of the game. As you advance your markers on this progress track, you will be able to use the energy from the old world as well. That is indicated by this table. I'll talk about it during the fifth phase, the progress phase. Furthermore, as this small symbol indicates, if you activate the same group of actions 4 times or more, you must also pay 1 additional energy. Then you perform the action and then it's the next player's turn. If you don't have enough energy to pay for the action, you may not take the action, you must take a different action, or you must pass. Now I'm going to explain all the actions in this game, and we will start with this action. The first symbol indicates that you get 1 resource of any type, and you can choose whether you place that resource in the old world or the new world. Then you can take 2 infrastructure moves. There are 2 infrastructure symbols. With the infrastructure move, you may either take the card from the display into your hand, or you may play a card from your hand. So with these 2 infrastructure moves, you may actually take 2 cards, or play 2 cards, or take 1, play 1, and so on. When you take the card from the display, take it into your hand, slide all the cards to the right, and then reveal the new card face up. To play a card, place it somewhere next to your player board and pay the resources indicated in the top left hand corner, and you have to pay those resources from the new world. Then if you meet the requirements printed on the card, you may immediately increase the production in the new world by the values shown on the card. If you don't meet that requirement, keep it next to your player board, and as soon as you fulfill that requirement, increase the production. You can find the explanation of all these requirements in the rulebook. Note that you may not have 2 cards with the same illustration, even if they have different effects. Then with the next action, again you can take 1 resource of any type, and then you can research 1 technology. To research a technology, choose any 1 column on your player board and research the lowest undeveloped technology in that column. To do that, take 1 of your tokens and place it on that technology. If that technology has this flash symbol, you gain the effect immediately. Other technologies will give you permanent effects for the rest of the game. When you have the level 1 technology developed, with the next research action, you may either develop another level 1 technology, or you can develop level 2 technology. When you choose the level 2, take the token and place it in the left space, meaning the technology is half developed, and then when you take that action again later in the game, you move the token to the right space, and that means that technology has been developed. Then moving on to the second group of actions, we will start with this one, which allows you to build one of these stadiums. To do that, pay the cost shown at the top of the card. The cost must be paid from 1 world only. It could be the old world or the new world, but it must be from 1 world. Then take the card and place it next to your player board, next to the world the resources came from. Then, if needed, slide the cards in the direction of the arrows and reveal the new card face up. Then, similar to stadiums, with this action you can buy spaceships. The process is exactly the same. Pay the cost indicated on the tile. The cost must be paid from 1 world only. Then take the tile from the display, place it next to your player board, next to the world the resources came from, and then refill the display by sliding the tiles and reveal the new one face up. Now there's one common rule for all these components at the bottom of the game board. Before you take one of the tiles, or one of the infrastructure cards, or one of the stadiums, you can pay 1 resource from any of your worlds and discard any or all of the tiles in that particular section. The discarded tiles are placed at the bottom of the stack, then slide all the remaining tiles and reveal the new tiles face up. Now, before I explain this settle action, let me first explain this prefabricate action. So it's in the third group of actions. With this action, you may pay one resource from either side of your board, from either world, and take the factory tile of the matching type and place it on the world that the resource came from. The factory tile on your player board is already in play, however it's not producing anything. The factory tile on your new world is waiting to be placed on the new world using the settle action. If the factory tile would be on the old world, you can use these ships to ship it to the new world and then you can settle it. Note that you are limited by 4 factories of each type. Then very quickly with this action you have to spend 1 food and you can only spend it from the new world. And as these 2 icons indicate, place 2 of your tokens on the new world and these become population tokens. And now I can come back to the settle action. With that action you can take the population tokens and the prefabricated factory tiles from the new world side of your player board and settle them on the new world. The new world is separated into 4 biomes: tundra, desert, forest and the ocean, the sea. And each new world site is marked with the requirements to settle it. In order to settle this location, you need to have 1 population token. Here you need 1 factory tile. Here we need both the population token and the factory tile. And in the spaces like this, in addition to population tokens and the factory tile, you also need to have these settlement symbols. Usually you get these symbols from the markers on the progress track. When you decide to settle the location, you must settle it completely. So here you have to place 2 population tokens and 1 factory tile. And in addition to placing the population token, for each population token you have to pay 1 steel from the new world. So here I can take 2 population tokens, pay 2 steel. The population tokens are then placed on the space. Then take the prefabricated factory tile, place it on that space, and given that we have these settlement symbols, which we have by the position of these markers, the space is now fully settled. Now, increase the production on the new world by these symbols. This is 1 energy, 1 steel, and 1 steel. So that's 2 steel and 1 energy. When you settle this kind of space later in the game, when you place a population token here, you still only pay 1 steel, however you increase the production by 2. That's what those 2 small circles mean. In this example, you would increase that production by 3. However, in order to settle the spaces on the sea, you have to advance on this progress track first. At the start of the game, you can only settle on these tundra locations. When you cross this space with one of your markers, you will be able to settle on these tundra spaces. When you cross this space, you will be able to settle the forest spaces. And finally, when you pass this space, you will be able to settle the sea spaces. And that concludes all the actions from your player board. We have not talked about this one, but here you can make 2 infrastructure moves, the same as this action, but without the free resource. And looking at the group number 4, this one allows you to make 1 technology progress. And here you gain 1 resource, and then you may do 3 resource exchanges, which means you can exchange 1 resource for another one of a different type. However, the exchange must be done always on 1 side. So when you take 1 resource from the old world, for example, you exchange it for a different type in the same world. However, not all the 3 exchanges must be on the same world. You can do 1 in the old world, 2 in the new world, for example, and so on. Now, if you ask why would you play this action if you can play the same action with the free resource as well, the answer is that these numbers not only indicate the group, but they also indicate the power, which is very important for advancing on this progress track. More on that during the phase number 5. The third phase of each round is the transport phase. In this phase, you may use your ships to move stuff from the old world to the new world. There are several symbols on the spaceships. This one allows you to evacuate a site from the old world. This one allows you to take either the factory or stadiums based on the number here, and this one allows you to transport resources. To evacuate a site from the old world, choose the site with the edge of the color indicated on the spaceship. We have yellow edges here, this one and this one, but we can also have blue and dark gray. So with this yellow half circle here, I can, for example, evacuate this side or this side. I would not be able to do it with this one because it doesn't have any yellow edge. If you evacuate the site like this with these two circles, place 2 population tokens on the spaceship. If you evacuate the factory site, take the factory tile of the same type and place it on the ship. Now, if you evacuate a site, flip it face down to indicate that it has been evacuated, but it also means that it will not produce any resources on the old world. Then if the ship contains these symbols, you can evacuate factories or stadiums. The number you can evacuate is also stated here. If you evacuate a stadium, simply take the card and place it on the spaceship. If instead you decide to transfer the factory, you can evacuate the factory from your old world, and for example this factory doesn't have any edge color. So this is the only way how to evacuate this energy factory. Again, flip it face down, take the matching factory tile and place it on the spaceship. And finally, you can also transfer resources up to the number stated here. Keep in mind that you will need these 2 resources, 2 energies, to move the ship. That's also indicated here at the top of your player board. So I need to spend 2 energy to move the ship. I can load these 2 resources on the spaceship and off we go. Ships from the old world move to the new world. And by the way, if you have any spaceships in the new world, you only pay 1 energy to move them back to the old world so that you can load them and send them back to the new world in the next round. Keep in mind that the energy costs must always be paid from the world where the ship starts from. Then unload the ships, take all the components from the ship and place it on the new world. And just to clarify, these ships fly simultaneously, so you may not fly in with the ship from the old world, unload the resources and then spend the energy to send a ship back to the old world. One last note, these 2 tokens from the ocean cannot be evacuated. They will be moved during the 5th phase by advancing on the progress track. Then in the phase number 4, the new player order is determined. The player with the most happy faces goes first. Count the happy faces from your technologies and from stadiums, whether they are in the old world or the new world. And in case 2 players have the same number of happy faces, simply change their relative order. In the 5th phase, players will advance on this progress track. To determine how many steps you can advance, first calculate the total power of your actions. The group number of the action determines the power of that action. So here we have 2 actions from level 1, 1 action with power 3 and 1 action with power 4. That is 4 plus 3 plus 1 plus 1. The total power is 9. Calculate this power for all players. Then, before any player moves on the progress track, move all these markers to this lane. It is called the passing lane. And now, using the new player order from the previous phase, starting with the first player, players will advance on this progress track, number of spaces equal to their power. You can split those number of spaces between your 2 markers any way you want. So with a power of 9, you can, for example, go 5 and 4, or even 9 and 0 if possible. These sections are called steps. Then these are spaces within the step, And these are transitions, they are not steps, they are skipped when you move over them. So in our example, let's move 5 steps with this marker. So that would be first, second, third, fourth, fifth step. Now in this step, you can choose any available space. If that space has any immediate benefits, take those benefits, and these are settlement symbols that I've talked about during the settle action. Then with the second marker, we can go 4 steps, first, second, third, and fourth, and that's it, and then it's the next player's turn. Now, each space can only contain one marker, except for the passing lane that may contain any number of markers, and this bottom lane is used all the time. The upper lane is only used in a 3 and a 4 player game. Then when you move your markers, you may decide to move 0 with one of your markers. In that case, you simply move down into one of the available spaces in the same step. And then if you end your movement in the step where all the spaces are occupied, you may simply remain in the passing lane. Then your 2 markers may never get too far away from each other. You can only have maximum 1 transition between your markers, which means you would not be able to move this marker behind the second transition because now there are 2 transitions between those markers. Whenever you move over these transitions, apply those effects immediately. This symbol indicates that when the first of your marker moves over this transition, flip one of your ocean production tokens face down. It has been evacuated and will no longer produce resources in the old world. When you move over this transition space with your second marker, flip the second token face down. Then, when at least one of your token moves over this second transition, this first half of this arrow indicates that you can now settle the desert biomes in the new world. Which means that in addition to these tundra spaces, you may also settle these desert spaces. Then, when you move over with your second token, you resettle one of your productivity token. So take one of those productivity tokens and place it face up next to your new world side of the player board and increase the production of each resource by 1. This second transition is also very important for how you pay the energy for your actions. When you have both of these markers before the second transition, as this symbology indicates, you pay all the energy only from the old world. And I mean the energy for your actions. When at least one of your markers passes over the second transition, you may pay the energy from one or the other world or from both. You can combine the payment. And finally, when both of your markers pass the second transition, you may only pay the energy from the new world. Then this third transition is basically the same as the second one. When first of your markers moves over, you can now settle these forest locations in the new world, and when you move over with the second marker, you resettle the second production token. So you will now have both of them available and again increase the production of each resource by 1. And when at least one of your markers moves over the final transition, you can settle these C spaces. When you reach the last space with one of your markers, all the remaining moves must be performed with the second marker, and when your second marker reaches the last space, then you stop there and you cannot move any further. The sixth phase is the bonuses phase. Each year has this bonus card, and you can always peek ahead on all the cards in this pile. And in this phase, you compare your power level with these indicators on the card. If your power level exactly matches one of these numbers, you get the bonus shown on the card, and if needed, resolve these effects in the player order. Now, if you want, you can use the generous bonus variant. In that case, if your power level is 6 or less in this example, you would gain this bonus. then if your power level would be 7 to 13, you would gain this bonus. And if your power would be 14 or more, you would not gain any bonuses. Then the last phase of each round is the cleanup phase. First, discard the year-end bonus card, move the round marker or the year marker to the next year, then refresh the offer for stadiums, spaceships, and infrastructure. Always discard the tile or the card from the space with X, place it at the bottom of the corresponding stack, then slide the remaining tiles in the direction of the arrows, and again reveal the new tile or card face up. Then remove all your action cards as the action markers from under your player board, reset your action marker to 0, and that's the end of the round. In the race mode, the game ends when any player has 3 stadiums, at least 3 stadiums in the New World, and all the 3 production markers on level 8 or higher. That's also indicated by this red line. If this happens during the action phase, all other players will have one final action and then the game ends. If it happens in any other phase, then complete the phase and the game is over. After the end of the game, you will move your lowest production marker based on the number of penalties you have accumulated. If you have more than one production marker at the lowest level, choose one of them. Now, for each penalty chip, reduce that production marker by 1 level. Then for each site in the old world that has not been evacuated yet, reduce the production marker by additional level. And for each stadium you are missing, you would also reduce the production marker by 1 level. That applies to players who would have less than 3 stadiums. Then, if you have the most happy faces, increase that production marker by 2 levels, and the player with the second highest number of these faces increases that level by 1. But don't count the happy faces on stadiums in the old world. The old world is now inhabitable. In a 2-player game, the player with a higher number of these faces increases the level by 1, the other player gains nothing. If players are tied for most happy faces, they all get +2 increase, other players will get nothing, and if there are ties for the second place, for the second most happy faces, all these players will get +1 increase. Then after all these adjustments, if there is any player who meets these winning conditions of having 3 stadiums and all 3 production markers on at least level 8 or higher, that player wins the game. If multiple players meet these win conditions, then the player with the most happy faces wins the game. If no player meets the final condition, then compare the lowest production marker of each player, and the player with the highest, lowest production marker wins the game. If there are ties, then the player with the 3 stadiums wins the game, and if there are more players with at least 3 stadiums, then the player with the most happy faces wins the game. In the points mode, you will always play the full 4 rounds, and only then the game will be over. Then score the victory points based on the overview which is on the back of your help card. First, score the victory points based on the level of your lowest production marker. Here we have 8, so for 8 that is 10 victory points. Then, as indicated here, score victory points for each of your goal cards. Then take the penalties as shown. For each unevacuated site from the old world, you lose 2 victory points. Then 1 additional victory point for each population token that could have been evacuated, and this adds up to these unevacuated sites. So, for example, if you have this site not evacuated, you lose 2 victory points plus 2 more victory points for 2 population tokens that could have been evacuated. Then lose 3 victory points for each stadium you are missing, so you need at least 3 of them. And then you lose 3 victory points for each penalty chip. Then players who have at least 3 stadiums would score these happy faces. The player with the most happy faces scores 6 victory points, the player with the second most happy faces 4 victory points, and so on. In a 2-player game, the player with the most happy faces scores 4, the other player gains nothing. Then the player with the most points is the winner. The advanced variant of the game can be played in both the race mode and the points mode. Use this cover tile to cover the actions in the first group. Shuffle the deck of these action cards, deal 7 to each player. Choose 4 of them to keep and discard the remaining 3. Then, during the action phase, you can either place an action from your player board by using the action card as the marker, or you can play the action card face up and perform the effect on the card. Either way, you still have to advance your action marker and pay the energy if needed. At the end of your turn, always draw up to 4 cards in your hand. If you played any actions that gave you more action cards and now you have more than 4 cards, simply discard down to 4. When playing the card action, if the card is split into 2 sections, you may perform one, the other, or both actions. Furthermore, you may only use the action from the power level 1 only once per round. If you do, flip the tile to indicate that it has already been used. When calculating the power level, add the values from your player board and also from the cards. In this example, we would have 1 plus 6 plus 1 plus 3, that's 11. And if you have an action card which has more than one power level value, you can choose any of those values, and you can choose a different value for the progress phase and a different value for the bonuses phase. For these bonuses, always choose the generous bonus variant. During the cleanup phase, take the discard pile and shuffle it into the draw deck. Then each player will draw 3 additional cards so that they would have 7 cards. And from these 7 cards, again, choose 4 to keep and discard the remaining 3. You do this at the start of the action phase, so you may do the income first and then choose the cards for the action phase. There are 2 additional modules in the game. You can use them in the points game with or without the advanced action variant. And the first module has these public objective cards. At the start of the game, randomly draw 3 of them. And the first player to meet the objective on the left edge of the card would take the card. In this case, you would have to have at least 5 technologies. And if you have the card in hand, you can play it during the action phase in addition to the action. To play the card, you have to pay the resources shown on the card. You have to pay them from the new world. Then you may immediately increase the production by the number shown on the card, and you will score this number of victory points at the end of the game. The second module is this line majorities. At the start of the game, during setup, choose either side A or B and mark the sides shown here with the yellow labels. You can see those small numbers 2 and 3 next to those sides. When you place the yellow label there, you can choose random side, and these black arrows indicate the line of sides that will be scored at the end of the game. At the end of the game, evaluate each line separately, and the player with the most settled sides will score 6 victory points, the second player 4 victory points, and the third player 1 point. In a 2-player game, it will be 4 victory points and 0. You have to have at least one side settled in order to score victory points, otherwise your bonus score would be 0. Split the ties as you do when you score happy faces. The game also comes with a solo game, which uses this solo deck. You will play a points game, and you can use the advanced action variant or not. You will basically play a 2-player game, however, place 3 tokens in this turn order track. Place your token to the first position, and then there will be 2 tokens. One of them will be for an extra civilization. Then, if there are any stadiums with 4 or 5 happy faces in the display, place the card to the bottom of the deck and draw the new card face up. Do this anytime during the first and second year of the game. Only in the 3rd and the 4th round, those 5 happy faces and 4 happy faces stadiums will be available. When drafting the goal cards during setup, you simulate a draft of 2 players. So you have the 4 cards, you choose one and pass the 3 to the other player. And when you draft your own cards, you always look at them, choose which one you want. When you draft for the simulated opponent, simply remove a card at random. Finally, from the deck of solo cards, remove this card with this symbol. It will only be added at the start of the 3rd round. Then, when determining the turn order, these 2 civilizations are always 2.5 happy spaces away from each other. If it sounds complicated, then let me do an example. Let's say this pink player has 5 happy faces, then you have 3 happy faces, and the blue player has actually 2.5 happy faces, which means you are second in the player order. However, if you only have 2 happy faces, this player has 2.5 happy faces, that means you would be third. During the action phase, on the opponent's turn, flip the top card of the deck and perform the indicated action. The number shown on the other card applies to the action. However, if the card shows an X, that means the opponent does not perform the depicted action. With this ship action, you simply remove the card from the indicated position. Number 1 is the position marked with the X symbol. This would be number 2 and this is number 3. So, with removing the tile from number 1, place it to the bottom of the corresponding deck and refill the display as you do during the standard game. With the infrastructure action, you do exactly the same thing with the indicated position. So here, you would remove the card from the 3rd position. The situation is slightly different with the stadiums. You also take the card from the indicated position. However, this time, place it beside the main board because this simulates that the opponent has built that stadium. Then refill the display as usual. Then with this symbol, the opponent will perform the settle action. The number and the letter indicate where that location will be settled. First, during setup, place this special solo tile in this exact location. It is on the edge of this last Tundra tile. And during the settle action, move that tile indicated number of spaces clockwise. So it would be 1, 2. If the number would be 3, it would go here and so on. There's one exception here. If the other card would show X, treat it as 4 as shown on the card. After moving the tile clockwise, use this letter to define the direction. Here it's letter B, so the direction will be this line. And again, count the number of spaces equal to the number on the card. So here we have 2, 1 and 2. So this is the location that will be settled. Place the population token on that site, but this virtual player doesn't use any player board, so there is no need to increase any production. If that particular site will be already occupied, then the virtual player doesn't settle. When moving on the progress track, the power level of your opponent is determined by these numbers on the year-end bonus card. Your opponent, or the markers of your opponent, always moves this higher number, and in odd years the extra civilization moves this lower number. In even years the extra civilization moves the higher number as well. And in both cases the marker which is further ahead always moves the number of spaces shown on the card. So if the game would be, for example, in the 3rd round, the odd number, the extra civilization moves the lower number of spaces, and the marker, which is further ahead, moves 2 spaces forward. So that would be 1 and 2. The second marker moves the remaining number of spaces, so that would be 3, 4, 5 and 6. Your opponent would move 1 and 2, and the second marker would move by 9 spaces. Then at the end of the game, use the scoring for 2 players and count the happy faces from the stadiums built by your opponent. 60 points is a good score, but Designers suggest that you may reach 80 when you get better with the game. So that's how you play Evacuation. If you have any questions or comments, I'll do my best to answer as many as I can. If you like the series, please subscribe. You can even support the channel on the Patreon page. You've been watching Game in a Nutshell. My name is Branislav Berec and hope to see you next time. I would like to thank everyone who has ever supported the channel, and especially the current supporters listed on this page. If you too would like to support the channel in creation of videos like this and other video tutorials and other content on this channel, please visit the patreon.com/Nithrania.